My name is Maysoon. I'm from Kuwait. I am here in Mozambique doing my internship teaching English to children from the ages from first grade, second, third, fourth, fifth, up till sixth grade. I decided to do my internship here in Mozambique mainly because I've never been to Africa, and it was always a dream to come here. And I know that the realities in Africa are so different than back home. So if you don't know where Kuwait is, it's in the Middle East, the Gulf countries in general, and it's between Saudi Arabia and Iraq. So you can already imagine how different it is from Mozambique. And we have a lot of people from Kuwait who come to South Africa, but Mozambique was a bit random, so that's why I also really wanted to come here. The reason I chose teaching English as my project was mainly because I'm very passionate about the education system, and I want to open my own school one day and really influence the education system back home. So I thought this would be a perfect experience for me to see a different side of the education system, how different countries or different realities influence children. The reason I'm very passionate about the education system is because I believe that it shapes the future generation of a country. So not just in terms of theory, but in terms of mindset, of developing how people think and how we can take the country forward in the future, especially when these students become leaders of whatnot. To say in general, it was a very unexpected experience throughout. So I've been here a total of 8 weeks, and the first 2 weeks were me just coming to settle into Mozambique, see the streets, walk around, get to know the people, and settle in a little bit. And then I got started with my project. The first week was mainly just observation to see how does the school run, how do they teach in classes, and then the weeks following to that was me actually teaching. Teaching was an incredible experience because the reality of the students here are so different than the reality of the students back in Kuwait. Kuwait, you're talking about a country that's very rich with oil, where the mentality is they have everything they want without doing anything at all. And you can really see that difference here when you see a very almost the opposite. Yet at the same time, you can see here how the children are so energetic and so happy, and back home where they're supposed to have everything, they complain about everything. Um, the teachers here were also an incredible learning experience because I got to see different methods of teaching, where I got to learn what I would like to implement in my school or in my education system, but also what I would prefer not to do. Especially as we're no longer in the information age, we're looking more at ideas and moving towards that type of leadership that we want for the future of our. In terms of learning experiences from within the school, in terms of challenges, there were so many. Everything from the actual teaching of the kids to even working with the administration. When it comes to the children, as I said, I was working teaching everything from pre up till the sixth grade. And you could really see the difference even in terms of how it is to control the class, which was almost the complete opposite of what I had expected. I had expected that it would be easier to control the older kids as they would be more mature, but you start to see that that's not the case, especially in that teenage phase where they want to be rebellious, where they have a personality and attitude. And the challenge was, how can I create a relationship between me and them where they would want to listen, they would want to learn. And that was one of the biggest challenges. It was, how could I be strict enough for them to listen, but friendly enough for them to want to learn. And it took time, but it came across pretty well, especially at the end when I was leaving. The comments that I was getting, it really showed that I was able to leave an impact. So that was one of the things. Another thing was the language barrier. Some of the students could speak English already because of their families or back home, or simply because they were more attentive students, versus other students who were not so exposed to the language. And so even trying to communicate with them, it was them looking at me like, sorry, I don't know what you're saying, or trying to speak to me in Portuguese and me telling them I don't speak Portuguese, so you're forced to speak to me in English. But with that as well came just the smiles, trying to get this warmness between the two, a lot of body language. But then the teachers were also there to explain things and to translate when I really needed, or we used the students to actually translate to each other, which worked quite well. So in one of the classes we had basically this one kid who was sitting in the front, and you could tell, like, even if the whole class was paying attention, he was like fidgeting with something, or he would just get up and like walk out, or like go do something, and you could tell his attention wasn't there. And this was in pre, like the, what do you call it, like the pre-class before grade 1. And his face was always so serious. Like for an entire week, I think I'd never seen him smile, not once. And you know that something's wrong with that. And the teachers were always like yelling at him to sit down, to like pay attention, and he was never really participating. So at one point we were doing, I think, like teaching body parts, like head, shoulders, and whatnot. And again, obviously he wasn't paying attention. And after the class like learned most of it, I directed them to the other teacher, and I went and I sat with him one-on-one. And I told him, I was like smiling, I was like, hi, and then I was like, May, and then I was telling him head, and he was repeating after me. So one-on-one, he started to repeat after me. And when we were done, I was like, high five, and he gave me a high five, and I gave him a hug. And when I gave him a hug, he like leaped, like he jumped on me. And throughout the rest of that same class, like he was still running around a little bit, but instead of like telling him yelling and saying sit down, I would come like pick him up and do like an airplane and then put him in his seat, and he would be laughing. And the teacher told me it's the first time I see him laugh. And I was like, okay. And the class following, like after that, like he was being naughty as well, and I told him, you're gonna make me sad. And as soon as I said that, he sat really quietly, and whenever he'd see me, he'd come running and leap on me and hug me as well. And like the type of hug that he was giving wasn't just like, oh, teacher hug, but it was like he didn't want to let go. And so I was talking to some of the teachers, and I was telling them, you need to pay attention to this student, because you can tell there's something psychological, you can tell that there's something back home, you can tell that there's something he's not getting. And it was surprising for me that they had never considered that. The teacher was telling me like, oh yeah, you're right, like maybe there is an issue. I was like, yeah, well obviously, because kids aren't usually like that. And when I told her, she went instantly and she hugged him. And at that point, like you can tell he was a bit confused, but he also hugged her, and she felt exactly the same way, because she looked at me and I kind of nodded. And every time I'd see him in the hallway, he'd just come running to me and like jump on me and hug me so tight. And even like other teachers would tell me, they're like, he's not usually like that. And I was like, yeah, you need to give him a different type of attention. And that for me, like he was one kid I'll never forget. Like I really want to come back in 10, 20 years and see what he becomes and what happens to him. Like